아니, 살려주십시오. 살려주십시오. 살려주세요.
윤혜 기사는 일은 참 잘하는데 말이 좀 많아. 이참에 좀 쉬어.
A heart that is not ruthless cannot stand firm. A person without money is worse than a ghost. 10 years ago, Boss Joe, who was still a street thug, relied on ruthless methods to become the gang leader of Incheon. As his status continuously rose, the desires in his heart, like a demon whose seal was opened, wildly expanded. After dealing with the accountant who betrayed him, Boss Joe knew clearly that the police's gaze was like a thorn in his back, closely watching his every move. However, this not only did not make him retreat, but instead stirred up the rebellion and arrogance deep in his heart. He wanted to prove to those law enforcers what it means to have extensive connections and influence. This time, the target that Boss Joe has set his sights on is the illicit money of high-level political figures that cannot see the light of day. With an amount as high as 150 billion won, this astonishing amount of illicit money is all stored in the heavily guarded Incheon customs. Such a high-risk target naturally also means super high returns. Boss Joe deeply knows that in order to successfully steal this huge sum of money, he must find a group of helpers with exquisite skills and extraordinary abilities. For this reason, he immediately sent people to search nationwide for multiple lock-picking experts. However, no one could open that encrypted safe within 10 minutes. This caused Boss Joe's face to be covered with dark clouds, and he became extremely anxious in his heart. According to intelligence, this huge sum of money has less than a month before it is transferred to another place. Due to the tight time, Boss Joe was so anxious that he had a headache. However, when one door shuts, another opens. The appearance of a group of people made Boss Joe's gloomy face show a happy smile. The young and handsome Ji-hyuk possesses extraordinary skills. Any sturdy vault is like nothing in front of him, and forging documents is as easy as pie for him. The carefully crafted theft plan is meticulous without any flaws. Just now, he successfully stole a precious artwork worth as much as 500 million won, because he was discovered by patrol personnel during the theft. In the emergency moment he could only choose to escape by rappelling, which also caused the artwork he worked hard to steal to be broken into 2 pieces. But what made his partner Ji-Yuan perplexed was that Ji-hyuk not only was not annoyed, but instead threw the artwork on the ground. Ji-Yuan watched as the duck that was almost in his mouth flew away like this, and he was very unhappy in his heart. However, Ji-hyuk used 3D printing to create a counterfeit, then dragged Ji-Yuan along and swaggered back to that auction house that was stolen from, handing the 3D printed counterfeit to the appraiser for authentication. After a round of careful authentication, the appraiser actually asserted that it was genuine. The appraiser's mysterious operation directly made Ji-Yuan dumbfounded. In reality, the other party had already pressed the alarm button without showing any expression, intending to capture these 2 sellers of counterfeit goods on the spot. But the clever Ji-hyuk had long anticipated that the other party would use such means. So he unhurriedly told them, whether this counterfeit can pass as genuine depends entirely on the appraiser's word. As long as the appraiser says it is genuine, then Ji-hyuk will work with him to inflate the price and sell it. And in the future, the 2 sides will split the profits 50-50, but the appraiser refuted.
진품이 어딘가 있는데 이걸 어떻게 경매에 올리나?
진품. 요거 말씀하시는 거죠?
Ji-hyuk took out photos of the counterfeit he had broken, directly revealing his identity as a thief to the appraiser, because the temptation of this deal was extremely high. For this reason, he cooperated with Ji-hyuk to auction the counterfeit as genuine, making a huge profit. Originally, Ji-Yuan was sure that Ji-hyuk would first enjoy himself for a while. After all, the previous gains were not small, but Ji-hyuk quickly locked onto a new target, which was to steal jewelry worth 3 billion won from a jewelry store. However, wanting to smoothly complete this theft was not easy. He needed to find a skilled hacker to help, thereby controlling the surveillance around the jewelry store. The task of finding a suitable candidate naturally fell to his partner Ji-Yuan. Guan's ability to find people should not be underestimated. Quickly, he found a highly skilled hacker Zhang Bei. However, Zhang Bei is called the betrayer in the industry. His reputation is not very good, but in Ji-hyuk's view, people with desires are easier to bribe, while those without desires are truly difficult to control. After confirming the candidate, they began to carefully plan this operation. In order to cover up the upcoming operation, Ji-hyuk targeted an art gallery. Through his investigation, the art gallery owner Eun-ha was worrying about funds. At this time, the gallery needed a large amount of money to continue sustaining itself. Therefore, Ji-hyuk actively approached Eun-ha and proposed investment. But actually, Ji-hyuk had taken a liking to the necklace Eun-ha was wearing. He seemed to have known early that this necklace was priceless. While talking with Eun-ha, he pretended to casually propose, "Since we are going to invest, there must be some collateral." Afterwards, he took Eun-ha to a jewelry store to have the necklace appraised. As expected, the necklace Eun-ha was wearing indeed had a high price. Ji-hyuk refused the negotiation with the first store. Before leaving, he kicked a suitcase under the sofa. Immediately after, he took Eun-ha to a second jewelry store. This store was their real target, so when entering the VIP room, Ji-hyuk superficially was conversing with the other party, but actually he was carefully observing the internal structure, and also memorized the model and appearance of the safe. After returning home, he recorded all the details he saw in the jewelry store in detail, thereby further improving his action plan. The next day, they proceeded to implement the carefully planned scheme. Ji-hyuk arranged in advance for Guin to act heavily drunk, pretended to accidentally trigger the alarm device, then quietly installed an explosive device on the jewelry store's glass. By the time the police officers arrived here, Guin and Ji-hyuk were already hiding in a corner, ready to go. After Jung Bae infiltrated all the surveillance systems inside the store and on the streets, they officially began the theft operation. With a loud bang, the glass was successfully blasted. Immediately after, they ignited the box that was quietly left under the sofa at noon. In an instant, the entire jewelry store was filled with thick smoke. The police mistakenly thought that a combustion accident had occurred inside this jewelry store. Therefore, a large number of police forces were quickly attracted here, and Ji-hyuk and Guin immediately began the theft of the real target. The two who entered the store quickly split up. Guin was responsible for taking away the store's surveillance hard drive. Ji-hyuk used a drill to bore into the safe. After taking the hard drive, Guin came to Ji-hyuk's side, closely watching the decibel meter, because once the sound of drilling exceeds 130 decibels, it would definitely be detected by the patrolling police officers nearby. But due to time constraints, they had no time to care too much. Even after learning from Jung Bae that patrol officers were approaching, Ji-hyuk, who was in charge of drilling, continued drilling intently. Meanwhile, Guin was already panicked and terrified, and he repeatedly urged Ji-hyuk to stop immediately. However, not only did Ji-hyuk not stop in time, but he also turned the power drill to its maximum setting and continued drilling. Finally, he successfully drilled through the safe. Immediately after, Ji-hyuk placed an instrument inside the safe, put on headphones, and began the unlocking process. Due to the time constraints, Ji-hyuk had no choice but to send Guin out to take a risk and buy him some time. Once outside, Guin quickly smashed the window of a nearby vehicle, triggering a sharp alarm that successfully caught the attention of the patrol officers. Meanwhile, Ji-hyuk, relying on his expertise, quickly opened the safe and successfully took diamonds worth 3 billion won. This bold and meticulously planned theft made them overnight celebrities in the world of thieves. But coincidentally, the goods they had stolen actually belonged to Boss Joe. However, upon learning that the jewels had been stolen, Boss Joe was not angry but rather pleased, because they were exactly the skilled technicians he had been looking for. Yet, the simplest way to find Ji-hyuk and his team was to track their channels for selling stolen goods. Given the extreme rarity of the stolen jewels, only a handful of black markets nationwide could handle such items. Boss Joe quickly tracked down one of them and located Ji-hyuk's group. However, the calculating Boss Joe did not rush to take action immediately. Instead, he sent Ju-won to investigate each person's background and weaknesses. After all, those who want to achieve great things have always treated others with courtesy first, and only if the other party does not appreciate it do they resort to forceful measures. Meanwhile, The Criminal Investigation Division also took notice of this jewel theft case, because they are curious why the always ruthless Boss Joe, after the items were stolen, did not engage in fierce retaliation but instead remained silent, as if nothing had happened. Therefore, the police decided to start their investigation by looking into the suspects of the theft case. After Boss Joe gained a preliminary understanding of Ji Hyuk and his team, he immediately took his men to Ji Hyuk's base and restrained Guin and Jung Bae. When Ji Hyuk returned to the base that night, he discovered that it had already been taken over by mysterious individuals. Despite being outnumbered, Ji Hyuk did not hesitate to confront them. As a result, Zhu Wan quickly subdued Ji Hyuk with just 2 punches. Zhu Wan then dragged Ji Hyuk to Boss Joe as if he were handling a small animal. Boss Joe then directly stated his intention. He demanded that Ji Hyuk's team work for him. However, Ji Hyuk did not take Boss Joe seriously at all and outright refused his demand. Shortly after, the 3 of them were locked in a metal cage and starved for 2 days and 2 nights. When Boss Joe asked them again about their decision, they still refused to work for him because they knew that those who worked for Boss Joe never ended well. Although Boss Joe had leverage over them, he still made them a very attractive offer. If they could retrieve 150 billion won from customs, the jewels worth 3 billion won would be theirs, and they would also receive a 5% commission. Faced with such tempting conditions, Ji Hyuk ultimately chose to compromise.
하겠습니다.
While discussing the plan, Ji Hyuk and his team learned that the 150 billion won was stored at Incheon Customs, which not only had a large number of security personnel but was also surrounded by surveillance cameras and infrared devices. Additionally, moving 3 tons of cash was extremely difficult. For Ji Hyuk, the security and infrared devices were not the main issues. The real problem was how to avoid the weight checks at each checkpoint during the transportation process. However, regarding this issue, Boss Joe had already made plans. He took Ji Hyuk and others to see the vouchers he had custom-made earlier. Boss Joe had opened a trading company 1 year ago. He used vouchers manufactured from China, regularly input these paper vouchers into the company system every month, and then distributed them to his various territories for consumption use. And the fastest batch of vouchers would arrive in 2 weeks. Their weight exactly the same as the weight of 150 billion Korean won in cash. In this way, he would be able to smoothly enter the customs under the name of trade. After shipping out the real cash, use the vouchers to cover it up. In this way, he could perfectly avoid any inspection. Ji Hyuk saw this, and could not help but praise Boss Joe for considering so thoroughly. Not only that, the cunning Boss Joe always liked to make 2 preparations. He secretly called for Jung Bae. Someone like him who forgets righteousness when seeing profit is exactly the type of person Boss Joe likes to use. Boss Joe let Jung Bae act as an inside agent to closely monitor Ji Hyuk and their every move. At this time, the police successfully locked onto Ji Hyuk's whereabouts, but the police had no substantial evidence to prove that Ji Hyuk was related to the jewelry store theft case. According to relevant regulations, the police's questioning cannot exceed 2 hours. Therefore, after 2 hours, due to insufficient evidence, Ji Hyuk walked out of the police station without any trouble. The next day, when Boss Joe found Ji Hyuk to discuss the action plan, he discovered that the hotel lobby was ambushed with many police, so he walked into the elevator without showing any expression, and then let Zhu Wan take Ji Hyuk and quickly leave the hotel. Zhu Wan entered the room, quickly cooperated with Ji Hyuk, put all the materials on the wall into the bag, and left the room before the police arrived. But when the police arrived, they discovered a hidden secret room, inside covered with photos. In the photos, they also discovered the floor plan of Incheon Customs, and on the calendar, the action date was left. At this time, Ji Hyuk, who successfully met with Boss Joe, introduced his action plan. He proposed letting Guin make several gasoline bombs, then letting Guin and others disguise as environmental department personnel to enter the customs. Then Zhu Wan would place the box containing the gasoline bombs in a hidden location. Guin is responsible for entering the customs interior, installing devices to control monitoring and infrared. This perfect plan of feint in the east and attack in the west had already started quietly. However, The most critical part is that Ji-hyuk needs to open the safe door within 10 minutes. However, after multiple rehearsals, he always failed to complete on time. But Ji-hyuk not only was not anxious, instead he said to Guin, Boss Joe is definitely not a person who keeps promises, so he also left a backup plan for himself. He plans during the action to forge Boss Joe's logistics company information, replace it with his own designed information, in order to reap the benefits without effort. But Ji-hyuk never expected the seemingly perfect plan actually was all overheard by Jung-bae, who was nearby. Immediately, Jung-bae conveyed the heard content to Boss Joe. At the same time, although the police knew the opponent's next target, they had no substantial evidence to take further action. Helplessly, they could only monitor Boss Joe's company. However, strangely, under tight monitoring, Boss Joe's company had no movement. On the other side, Boss Joe, for better controlling the situation, he let Ju-won deeply investigate Ji-hyuk's background. After a round of detailed investigation, Ju-won finally found some key clues. Originally, Ji-hyuk was related to an industry veteran that Boss Joe had killed before, and this veteran was exactly Ji-hyuk's master. Not long ago, when Ji-hyuk and his master were together on the rooftop, Ji-hyuk just went out to buy some alcohol, and then saw his master fall to his death downstairs. When Ji-hyuk looked up, he saw a familiar figure moving quickly across the rooftop, which was enough to prove that his master's fall was no accident. Boss Joe looked at the investigation materials in his hand and finally realized that Eun-ha was Ji-hyuk's master's daughter. Now that he knew Ji-hyuk's weakness, he naturally had to grip it tightly. At this moment, Ji-hyuk also knew that his biggest concern was his master's daughter, so he told Eun-ha he was her father's disciple, and asked her not to go out and to stay hidden at home for a few days. Although he knew who was responsible for her father's death, he couldn't tell Eun-ha yet, and his purpose in getting close to Eun-ha was to protect her. However, no matter how Ji-hyuk explained, Eun-ha no longer believed his words, because he had used Eun-ha's necklace to commit a crime, which was an undeniable fact. Because of this, their conversation ended unhappily. Just as Eun-ha returned to her car, she was suddenly ambushed by Boss Joe's men. At this moment, Ji-hyuk was still completely unaware of the situation. On the day of the operation, Boss Joe smoothly entered the customs area posing as the CEO of a trading company. Jung-bae, disguised as a telephone repairman, also entered the customs area. His main task was to hack into the customs security system, paralyze it, and force a restart. The time from system restart to full recovery was a full 40 minutes. Once everything was ready, Boss Joe entered the password and detonated the explosive device. The explosion instantly attracted everyone's attention, and immediately afterward, guards and firefighters rushed toward the blast area. Employees within the blast area quickly fell into chaos, panicking and beginning an emergency evacuation. By this time, Ji-hyuk and his team had already disguised themselves as an emergency response unit and infiltrated the scene. Their actual goal was not rescue, but to reach their real destination. They first arrived at the container where Boss Joe stored the vouchers, then quickly dissolved 3 million vouchers using strong acid, keeping only 300,000 to cover the real cash. Meanwhile, Jung-bae quickly implanted a virus into the security system, making it appear as if the sudden system crash was caused by the explosion. This way, the frustrated person in charge would have no choice but to call and request a restart. Boss Joe, intercepting the communication line, pretended to be the customs director.
방법이 그것뿐인가?
지금 그게 최선입니다.
셧다운을 진행하게.
During the system restart, all surveillance and infrared devices in the entire area ceased operation, and the critical 40-minute window officially began. After handling the vouchers, the team quickly moved to the target storage area under the pretext of searching for explosive devices, and subdued the guards while they were off guard. After dealing with the guards, they left 2 people to provide cover while the others entered the interior to assist Ji-hyuk in opening the vault door. To open the vault within the limited time, Ji Hyuk ignored the risk of explosion and ordered Guin to turn the valve to maximum power. Soon, they burned through the vault's steel door faster than expected. The real challenge had just begun. He had to crack the vault's password within the remaining 8 minutes. After a long first attempt, he still failed to open it. After all, during previous practice sessions, he had never successfully completed it within 10 minutes. As time ticked away, the time left for him grew shorter and shorter. Ji Hyuk focused all his attention, pushing his perception to the extreme, and concentrated fully on listening to identify the position and state of the lock core. Finally, just as time was about to run out, he successfully opened the vault door. As the steel door opened, a mountain of gold appeared before everyone's eyes. Due to the enormous amount of cash, 150 billion, they needed to transport it in 2 trips. After transporting the first batch of money to the seaside, they then transferred it to another area of the customs via waterway, and finally secretly moved it into Boss Joe's container. However, just as they were preparing to transport the second batch of money, the criminal investigation team arrived at the door of their warehouse. In order not to arouse the police's suspicion, they had to pretend to be calm, and then opened the door to let them enter and search. Upon receiving the news, Ji Hyuk immediately started the car and hid behind the container. Just like that, they narrowly avoided the police's inspection. The police, who found nothing, had just left the area when Ji Hyuk drove out right after them. However, just as they were transferring the last batch of money, a patrol car suddenly drove over, so they quickly removed the police car lights, changed to a new disguise, and then parked the car aside. But Ji Hyuk felt that this was still very dangerous, and to avoid the other party's suspicion, he believed that he must divert their attention. So Ji Hyuk, despite Boss Joe's dissuasion, resolutely chose to expose himself, thus attracting the patrol police's attention. After escaping the pursuit, Ji Hyuk ignored Boss Joe's questioning, took off all his equipment, and insisted on proceeding with his own plan. And Boss Joe had long been aware of his intentions. Ji Hyuk quietly infiltrated the customs information database, and just as he was about to modify Boss Joe's logistics information, he was caught red-handed by Boss Joe. Boss Joe had long known that Ji Hyuk was intentionally getting close to him, and the reason he did not expose him was to steal 150 billion won. And Boss Joe revealed to Ji Hyuk the reason for killing his master, which was because his master was not obedient enough and refused to participate in the plan to steal 150 billion won. In Boss Joe's eyes, anyone who defies him has only one path: death. At this time, what was worse was that the master's daughter had fallen into Boss Joe's hands. Now, for Eun-ha to survive, he must listen to Boss Joe's words. Boss Joe demanded that Ji Hyuk take the suitcase and go to the explosion site to attract all the police officers' attention. Ji Hyuk knew in his heart that this journey was fraught with danger, but he had no choice and could only obediently follow the other party's demands. Soon Ji Hyuk was surrounded by the police. He knew deeply that if caught by the police, he would hardly escape prison time, so he prepared to jump into the sea, but unexpectedly was shot by the police on the way. Then he sank into the sea and disappeared without a trace. When the news of Ji Hyuk being shot and falling into the water came over the walkie-talkie, Boss Joe showed a triumphant expression and took out his phone, activating the suitcase's detonation code. When Guin learned the news of Ji Hyuk's death, his whole person instantly felt as if his heart had turned to ashes. In contrast, Zhang Bei not only showed no sorrow, but also said, "This way we can split more money." At this time, Guin realized that Zhang Bei had betrayed them, so Guin punched Zhang Bei hard on the head. Unexpectedly, Zhang Bei directly pulled out a dagger and stabbed Guin in the abdomen. Finally, Guin was locked in the container under the watch of Zhu Huan and others. Boss Joe also successfully transported the container filled with cash out of customs. When Boss Joe lifted the covering vouchers, he found that there was not a single real currency underneath. He immediately discovered that the entire container was actually full of vouchers. This made Boss Joe instantly break down, and at this time, Zhu Huan and Zhang Bei were also completely confused, having no idea what had happened, or when and where the cash was swapped. Just then, Boss Joe's phone suddenly rang, and the person calling him was none other than Ji Hyuk. Even if Boss Joe requested reconciliation, Ji-hyuk was unwilling to say more nonsense, and instead told Boss Joe, "I have sent you a big gift." It turned out that initially, Ji-hyuk hid a listening device in the 3D printed fake artwork, then sold the item containing the listening device to Boss Joe, and eavesdropped on evidence of his crimes. Subsequently, Ji-hyuk delivered the collected evidence to the police station, so this time the police had enough evidence to bring Boss Joe to justice. At this moment, Boss Joe, under Ju-won's cover, hurriedly escapes from the back door, and before leaving, he specifically instructs Ju-won to eliminate Eun-ha. At this time, Jang-bae came to the basement and rescued Eun-ha. Just as they were leaving, they happened to run into Ju-won. At the critical moment, a police officer arrived here. Even though the police officer had fired a warning shot, Ju-won still had no intention of stopping, to prevent Ju-won from making more dangerous moves. The police officer quickly fired his gun. Only then did Jang-bae and Eun-ha luckily escape from Ju-won's grasp. After seeing Boss Joe escape from the back door, Jang-bae immediately called and told Ji-hyuk. Ji-hyuk told Jang-bae to take good care of Eun-ha, and leave the remaining matters to him to handle. Then Ji-hyuk called Boss Joe again and told him the whole truth. It turned out that long before the operation, he had arranged for helpers to mix in with the special police. Upon receiving the signal, Ji-hyuk immediately jumped into the sea, while detonating the blood packs on his body, creating a false appearance of death, because Boss Joe did not take the people around Ji-hyuk seriously at all. So before the operation, these helpers forged a police car, and on the day of the operation, took advantage of the chaos to join the police convoy. Ju-won and others, who mistook them for real police, all hid on the boat and did not dare to show themselves, while they parked the forged police car next to the money transport vehicle, opened the side doors of both vehicles, sprayed the real money with invisible ink, and then repackaged it and put it back in place. The real money that was put back into the container would become like vouchers after 30 minutes. So the container that Boss Joe had just opened still contained that batch of real money, and Guin was not actually killed by Jang-bae. He was just intentionally acting with Jang-bae to put on a show for Ju-won and the others. Finally, Ji-hyuk arranged for Guin and Jang-bae to disguise themselves as forensics personnel and receive this batch of seemingly useless vouchers. The reason Ji-hyuk told all this to Boss Joe was to accurately locate his position. Then he stepped hard on the accelerator and crashed into Boss Joe's vehicle.
졌잖아. 졌으면 순순히 인정할 줄도 아셔야지.
At this time, although Ji-hyuk really wanted to avenge his master, he thought that killing him with one shot would be too cheap for him. He wanted Boss Joe to face legal punishment and pay the due price for his crimes.
어이, 전화지! 이제 끝내자! 손 들어, 이 새끼야!
And as for them obtaining this batch of money, they only need to spray alcohol to easily dilute the ink on the real money. Finally, Ji-hyuk and his group became the true winners in this plan.